The clock on the wall of the small community bank in suburban Pennsylvania ticked towards 6 in the evening. It was a Friday night, the precise moment when the transition from the professional work week to the weekend leisure began. For the staff inside, the heavy doors were moments away from being locked, signaling the end of their shift and the start of their rest. Outside, the autumn air carried a sharp chill that settled over the dense tree line bordering the parking lot. A figure emerged from the shadows of the oaks, moving with a calculated rhythm that suggested hours of observation. He wore oversized clothing that obscured his frame and a terrifyingly realistic latex mask that froze a grotesque expression in place in the dimming twilight. The man did not run. He glided across the asphalt with the grace of a trained athlete. As he reached the glass entrance, he checked his watch one last time to ensure his timing was perfect. In his hand, a handgun was held with professional discipline, muzzle pointed toward the ground. He was not a desperate amateur looking for a quick fix. The chime of the door signaled his arrival, but before the tellers could offer a polite greeting, the atmosphere shifted into pure terror. He vaulted over the high wooden counter in a single, explosive movement that defied his middle-aged appearance. There were no wasted words and no unnecessary shouting to draw attention from the quiet street outside the bank windows. The intruder moved with a terrifying efficiency that suggested he had memorized every square inch of the interior layout. He commanded the staff to move with short, barked instructions that left no room for hesitation or heroic resistance. In his mind, a digital stopwatch was counting down the seconds because he knew exactly when the police would be notified. He ignored the heavy vault, focusing instead on the teller drawers where the quick cash was kept for the weekend rush. Thousands of dollars were swept into a sturdy bag in less than 60 seconds, while his eyes remained fixed on the perimeter. He was a phantom who understood that greed was the primary reason most bank robbers eventually got caught. As quickly as he had appeared, the masked man leaped back over the counter and vanished through the front door. By the time the first sirens began to wail in the distance, he was already deep within the thick brush of the neighboring woods. He did not head for a getaway car, parked on the curb like a common criminal would. Instead, he retrieved a concealed mountain bike from a prearranged hiding spot beneath a pile of fallen leaves and debris. He pedaled with intense fury through narrow deer trails where no patrol car could ever hope to follow his path. He navigated the darkness with the confidence of a man who had mapped these woods with mathematical precision and care. Minutes later, he reached a secondary location where a nondescript van was waiting in the shadows of a quiet residential street. The bike was disassembled and stowed away in seconds, and the mask was buried deep within a hidden compartment. He changed his clothes, wiped the sweat from his brow, and drove away slowly, blending perfectly into the evening traffic. The police arrived at the bank to find a scene of absolute confusion and terrified witnesses who could provide no useful descriptions. The robber had left no fingerprints, no DNA, and no physical evidence that could be traced back to a specific individual. He was a shadow that existed only in the fleeting moments of a Friday night, leaving investigators with nothing but questions. This was not an isolated incident, but rather a single chapter in a criminal career that had already spanned 2 decades. Across the Northeast, the legend of the Friday Night Bank Robber was beginning to grow into a nightmare for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They were hunting a ghost who seemed to understand their tactics better than they understood his brilliant mind. Every robbery followed the same flawless script: a small bank, a Friday evening, a wooded escape, and a total lack of evidence. To the public, it seemed like magic, but to the man behind the mask, it was simply a matter of statistics. He believed that if he controlled every variable, the outcome would always be in his favor, regardless of the odds. While the FBI analyzed blurry surveillance footage, the man known as Carl Gugasian was already miles away, returning to his quiet life. He was a scholar, a soldier, and a master of systems who had turned the art of the heist into a science. The world saw a criminal, but Carl saw a series of complex equations that he had successfully solved once again. To understand the ghost, one must look back at the broken fragments of a young boy's life in the suburbs of Philadelphia. In 1962, a 15-year-old Carl Gugasian was far from the calculating genius he would eventually become. A botched robbery at a local candy store ended with a gunshot wound and a long stay in a juvenile facility. This early failure did not break his spirit. Instead, it served as a brutal lesson in the necessity of preparation. While other delinquents wasted their youth in rebellion, Carl began to cultivate a cold and analytical mind. He realized that the difference between a common criminal and a legend lay in the mastery of technical details. After his release, Carl transformed himself into a model student at Villanova University, where he studied the complex world of electrical engineering. He moved with a quiet intensity, absorbing knowledge about circuits and systems that would later become his most dangerous tools. His professors saw a dedicated academic, never suspecting the dark ambitions brewing behind his focused gaze. The call of duty eventually led him to the United States Army, where his natural talents were sharpened by elite military training. He was not just a soldier. He was a student of tactical warfare and specialized weapons within the ranks of the Special Forces. The military taught him how to survive in the wild and move without leaving a trace. Carl learned the art of land navigation and the psychological pressure of high-stakes environments during his years of service. He discovered that the human mind was the most vulnerable part of any security system when confronted with sudden and overwhelming force. These lessons were etched into his memory, forming the foundation of his future criminal career. Even after his honorable discharge, the thirst for knowledge was not quenched, leading him to pursue a master's degree in systems analysis. He viewed the world as a massive, interconnected network of probabilities and variables that could be manipulated by someone with the right data. Every bank and every police procedure was just another system waiting for an expert. Not content with a master's degree, Carl pushed further to earn a PhD in statistics, a feat that placed him among the intellectual elite. He lived a double life as a quiet statistical consultant while spending his nights calculating the risk of various heist scenarios. The thrill of the challenge was more intoxicating than any financial reward his degrees could offer. People often asked why a man with such immense intellectual gifts would choose a life of crime instead of corporate success. For Carl, the answer was found in the sheer elegance of a perfectly executed plan that left authorities completely baffled. He saw the American banking system as a giant puzzle that he was uniquely qualified to solve. The transition from a highly educated civilian to a prolific bank robber was a gradual process of testing theories and refining methods. He spent months scouting small towns, analyzing the response times of local law enforcement and the terrain of surrounding forests. Every variable was documented and studied until the probability of failure was reduced to an absolute minimum. He was a man who understood that luck was for the unprepared, and that success was the result of rigorous engineering. By the early 70s, Carl was no longer the impulsive teenager who had been shot in a candy store. He had become a lethal combination of an elite commando and a world-class mathematician ready to strike. The quiet neighborhoods of Pennsylvania had no idea that a predator was living among them, disguised as a harmless scholar. He used his legitimate earnings to fund his research, purchasing high-quality equipment and masks that would ensure his anonymity for decades. The stage was set for a criminal career that would rewrite the history books of the FBI. Carl began to see himself as a master of shadows, a ghost who could operate within the light of day without being seen. He did not seek fame or the flashy lifestyle of a gangster, preferring the cold satisfaction of a job well done. In his mind, he was not just robbing banks. He was proving his intellectual superiority. Carl Gagosian did not view his crimes as mere robberies. He approached them as high-level engineering projects. Every target was subjected to a rigorous feasibility study that lasted for months before he ever stepped foot inside the building. He analyzed the structural layout of the bank and the surrounding geography with the cold eye of a professional systems analyst looking for a flaw. His primary criteria were deceptively simple, yet brilliantly effective for a man who preferred to operate alone. He specifically targeted small bank branches located in quiet suburban areas that were immediately adjacent to dense patches of woodland. This proximity to nature was not accidental. It was the cornerstone of his escape strategy and his greatest advantage over the police. Long before the night of the heist, Carl would venture into the chosen woods to prepare his supply caches. He utilized heavy-duty PVC pipes, sealing them to be completely airtight and waterproof against the elements of the changing seasons. These hidden tubes contained everything he might need, including weapons, extra cash, food, and various changes of specialized clothing. By burying these pipes deep in the earth or concealing them beneath piles of brush, he created a network of safety nets. This meant that even if he were chased immediately after a job, he would never be caught with the evidence on his person. He could simply vanish into the trees, change his entire appearance, and emerge as a harmless hiker or cyclist. The disguise was another masterpiece of deception that relied on the limitations of human memory during a high-stress event. Carl invested in expensive, professional-grade latex masks, often depicting grotesque creatures or exaggerated human faces that were impossible to forget. He knew that witnesses would fixate on the terrifying mask rather than noticing his true height, weight, or any distinguishing features. He adhered to a strict 2-minute rule for every single operation he conducted throughout his 30-year career. He understood that the window of time between the alarm being triggered and the arrival of the first patrol car was his lifeblood. If the money was not in the bag within 120 seconds, he would simply walk away empty-handed. The exit strategy was where his military training truly shone through the chaos of the criminal act. Upon exiting the bank, he would immediately sprint into the woods, where a mountain bike was pre-positioned for a rapid getaway. A bicycle could traverse narrow, muddy trails that were completely impassable for heavy police cruisers or motorcycles that stayed on the road. He pedaled through the darkness with the intensity of a professional athlete, utilizing night vision equipment when necessary to navigate the terrain. He had memorized the forest floor so thoroughly that he could ride at full speed without hitting a single stray branch or hidden rock. This silent method of transport allowed him to slip through police cordons without making a sound. Miles away from the scene of the crime, he would arrive at a secondary vehicle, usually a nondescript van parked in a public lot. The mountain bike would be quickly disassembled and stored in a hidden floor compartment where no casual observer could ever find it. Within minutes, the terrifying Friday night robber would transform back into a respectable doctor of statistics, driving home. His choice of Friday nights was a stroke of psychological genius that exploited the rhythm of the banking industry. Banks typically carried larger amounts of cash on Fridays to accommodate customers who needed money for the weekend ahead. Furthermore, police departments were often understaffed or distracted by the typical surge in weekend-related incidents like traffic accidents or public disturbances. Carl never fell into the trap of becoming greedy or reckless after a successful heist, regardless of the amount. He would often wait several months or even years between jobs to ensure that any heat from previous activities had completely cooled off. This patience was his shield, allowing him to maintain a low profile while the FBI files on his case grew larger. He treated each robbery as a data point in a larger statistical model that he used to refine his future actions. If a particular bank had updated its security cameras or changed its locking procedures, he simply adjusted his variables and moved on. The world was his laboratory, and the banks were merely the subjects of his ongoing experiment in perfect criminal execution. For 30 years, the statistical model remained flawless, protected by the dense canopy of the Pennsylvania forests and the silence of the night. Carl had accounted for police response times, getaway routes, and forensic limitations, yet he could never calculate the sheer unpredictability of human curiosity. In the small town of Radnor, a variable he ignored was about to collide with his carefully constructed reality. Two teenagers were wandering through the thick underbrush, far from the paved roads where the local patrol cars usually circled. They were not looking for a criminal mastermind or a hidden treasure, but rather a place to explore. Beneath a layer of damp leaves and rotting wood, one of them spotted the unnatural edge of a gray plastic surface protruding from the soil. It was a heavy PVC pipe, sealed tight with industrial strength caps that were designed to withstand the harsh moisture of the ground. Using a bit of force, the boys managed to pry open the container, expecting perhaps a time capsule or discarded trash. Instead, they found themselves staring at a terrifying latex mask and a collection of loaded weapons hidden in the dark woods. The local police were summoned to the scene, and the discovery quickly escalated to the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agents who had spent decades chasing a phantom finally had physical objects they could hold in their hands. The masks matched the descriptions from dozens of unsolved heists that had haunted the region since the late 1970s and 80s. Within the depths of the recovered pipes, investigators found more than just tools of the trade. They found the architect's specific notes. There were detailed maps with handwritten markings and specific logistical data that pointed toward a highly organized mind. Every scrap of paper was a breadcrumb leading back to a man who lived his secret life deep in the quiet shadows. Forensic experts meticulously scanned every inch of the evidence, looking for the one mistake Carl had made in his 30-year run. They eventually found a faint trace of DNA and a connection to a specific library in the Philadelphia area. The ghost was starting to take on a solid form, and the name Carl Gugasian began to appear on their radar. The FBI agents were stunned when they reviewed the background of their primary suspect, a man with multiple advanced degrees and military experience. He was not a typical bank robber driven by desperation, but a scholar who treated crime as a high-stakes game of chess. They realized they were dealing with a mastermind who would be extremely difficult to trap or intimidate. On the 7th of February 2002, the pursuit reached its final destination within the quiet halls of the Philadelphia Public Library. Carl was sitting among the stacks of books, perhaps researching his next target or simply enjoying the silence of the academic world. He did not hear the soft footsteps of the federal agents closing in on his position from every available exit point. The arrest was executed with surgical precision, mirroring the very efficiency that Carl had used during his many successful bank heists. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the man known as the Friday Night Robber did not struggle or shout. He simply looked at the agents with a cold, analytical expression, recognizing that his long game had finally reached its end. Subsequent searches of his properties and other woodland locations revealed a staggering, hidden history of criminal activity across several different states. The scale of his operations was far larger than anyone had previously imagined, involving over 50 separate robberies and millions of dollars. The master of systems had built an empire of theft that was finally crumbling under its own heavy weight. During the initial interrogation sessions, Carl remained remarkably calm, speaking with the measured tone of a professor explaining a complex mathematical theory. He understood the evidence against him was overwhelming, and that his statistical shield had been pierced by a random act of fate. The genius was now a prisoner of the system he had spent his life trying to outsmart. The legal weight crashing down upon Carl Gugasian was immense, as prosecutors initially sought a sentence that would ensure he never saw daylight again. With over 50 confirmed bank robberies spanning 3 decades, the sheer volume of his crimes suggested a man who was fundamentally incompatible with society. However, the doctor of statistics had one final, brilliant move left on his mental chessboard to secure his future. Recognizing the overwhelming evidence against him, Carl decided to pivot from an adversary of the law to its most valuable academic resource. He offered the Federal Bureau of Investigation a deal that they simply could not refuse in the interest of national security. He promised to reveal every hidden cache and explain every tactical vulnerability he had exploited within the American banking infrastructure. The following months were spent in high-security interrogation rooms that felt more like university lecture halls during their intense daily sessions. Carl meticulously mapped out the locations of dozens of buried PVC pipes that agents had never even suspected existed in the woods. He provided a masterclass in criminal psychology, explaining how his military training allowed him to bypass the most advanced alarms. Special agents who had hunted the Friday Night Robber for years now sat with notebooks, captivated by the level of detail he provided. He taught them how to look for the subtle signs of a master scout and how to predict the next strike based on geography. It was a surreal collaboration between the ultimate predator and the protectors of the financial system they guarded. The information was so valuable that the federal government agreed to a significant reduction in his potential prison sentence as a reward. Instead of facing life behind bars, Carl was sentenced to 17 years in a federal facility where he continued to be a model prisoner. He used his time to reflect on the variables that had finally led to his downfall in Radnor. Inside the concrete walls of the penitentiary, Carl did not act like the legendary criminal the media portrayed him to be every day. He remained a quiet and disciplined scholar, focusing his energy on physical fitness and further academic study within the prison library system. He knew that the passage of time was just another statistical inevitability that he had to endure with patience. While he served his time, his story became a cornerstone of training at the FBI Academy in Quantico for new generations of investigators. His methods were analyzed in documentaries like Masterminds, where experts marveled at the intersection of a PhD intellect and a specialized commando skill set. He had become more than a man. He was a living case study in criminal perfection and failure. On the 5th of May 2017, the heavy gates of the federal prison finally opened for the last time for the 70-year-old veteran. Carl Gugation stepped out into a world that was vastly different from the one where he had first begun his Friday night raids. Technology had replaced many of the systems he once manipulated, but his legend remained untouched by the modern digital age. He moved into a quiet life, occasionally participating in documentary projects and sharing his unique insights with those who sought to understand the criminal mind. The millions of dollars he had stolen were gone, but he possessed a wealth of experience that few humans could ever hope to truly comprehend. He was a survivor of his own ambition, and a ghost who had finally come home. The story of the Friday Night Bank Robber serves as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous weapon is a highly disciplined human mind. Carl proved that while a genius can outsmart a system for 30 years, they can never truly outrun the random chaos of the world. In the end, even the most perfect equation eventually encounters a variable that can never be solved.